Okay, welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we will discuss Book 4, which is a book concerning the nature of justice in a more direct way and its relationship with happiness. So right up front, we get this question about once we've addressed what would make the polis or the state or the city happy or fulfilled, and you realize you have to have all these different parts, these different individuals, these different roles doing their job well. Adeimantus says, but what about the happiness of the guardians? It looks like the guardians won't be happy if they live the way that you say they ought to live, Socrates, which is this moderate life where they don't, eat the dainty relishes, as it's put. They don't feast excessively and they don't drink excessively. They sort of temper their party spirit. And what Socrates does here in Book 4 is he says, well, we need to be careful in thinking about what we're after. What we seem to be after is the question of not the happiness of the parts primarily, but the happiness of the whole. That is, what would make the whole happy? Just as applying this to the case of the organism, like an animal, you're not asking the question, or we don't think the primary question is what would be healthy for the stomach. What's healthy for the stomach? That is an important question, but it's derivative on a more fundamental question, which is what's healthy for the animal as a whole. And once you've addressed the question of health for the whole animal, you can then reflect on and investigate the question of the health of the stomach, because the stomach's health is going to depend on its role in the whole. And so what Adeimantus was trying to get Socrates to do is to focus on the happiness of one of the individuals, one of the groups of individuals, one of the roles in this society, this city that they're constructing. That's supposed to be the ideal city. And focus on, but what would make them happy? And Socrates says, well, that's an important question. But to address it, we need to think about what would make the whole happy. And so that's what he does at the very bottom of this first page on Book 4, or page 103 in the Reeves translation, the Stephanus number 420b5. And I'll just read some of this. Socrates says, I think we will discover what to say if we follow the same path as before. You see, our reply will be this. It would not be at all surprising if these people were happiest just as they are. However, in establishing our city, we are not looking to make any one group in it outstandingly happy, but to make the whole city so as far as possible. For we thought that we would be most likely to find justice in such a city, and injustice by contrast in one that is governed worse. And we thought that by observing both cities, we would be able to decide the question we have been inquiring into for so long. And then here's what's significant. At the moment, then, we take ourselves to be forming a happy city, not separating off a few happy people and putting them in it, but making the city as a whole happy. Okay, so what's going on is the goal of politics, according to Socrates, is not how do we make each of the individuals happy. That's not the goal of politics, according to Socrates. Rather, the goal of politics is what would make the whole community happy. This is probably more familiar to us. This concept is more familiar to us within more local examples of community. Take for example marriage or even a friendship, where you engage in activities with friends, with a spouse, not so that you, or maybe not primarily, so that you as an individual can benefit from it. You as an individual can be happy from this, because that would presumably sort of negate the essence of the friendship, right? So if all acts of friendship or all acts of spousal love were self-serving, then it would actually destroy the relationship in the first place, and there wouldn't be a friendship, or there wouldn't really be a marriage, because those relationships are all built on the very fact that there is a unity between the two, which is the essence of the relationship. And so to act in a self-seeking or individualistic way is to step outside of that relationship and ask about the good of me or the happiness of me, which would then destroy the relationship or the marriage as such. And so what Plato is doing is he's saying that is the type of issue which is occurring at the level of the state, at the level of the city. And so politics is going to be this project, this endeavor to have the many constitute a one, analogous to the way that a husband and a wife constitute a one. And what you will see is that their good, the individual members' good, is a shared good, or what's known in the tradition as a common good. It's the common good of the state, or the common good of the marriage, which is what all of the individual's actions are at the service of. And so I'll just read a little bit more on this next page as the dialogue continues to draw this out, because I think this is really significant, and it helps you understand why perhaps the political situation that we find ourselves in is not something that Socrates would have found to be conducive to justice, right? So a reading of this and a reflection on this helps you to see that there might be kind of pitfalls in the democratic structure of government that we have, because it might incline one to individualism, and it just so happens that it might present itself as there's a common good that we're all after, but really what this common good that we're all after turns out to be within a liberal democracy like we find ourselves is the common good is that we all get to seek our own individual good. We each get to make ourselves happy. That's what we all are trying to aim at. We all come together so that we can each individually isolate ourselves and make ourselves as happy as we can on our own, and which is in reality not a common good, because it's not shared. And this is a critique that Socrates has later on of democracy, namely that you don't actually get a shared life or a shared good. You could think of it going to the case or the analogy of marriage, again, where it's not like the two spouses, the husband and the wife, come together and they say, okay, well, I want to be happy and you want to be happy, so let's make these compromises. I'll do things for you and you do things for me. I'll do the dishes and cut the grass and go work a job, and then I'll give you half of the paycheck, and you can then raise the kids and what have you. And so we can both individually live good lives. If that's the case, that's not really a marriage. That's more of a social contract that you buy into or that you subscribe to. It's not a sharing of a single life. At the very least, it's not the end or the goal of the sacrament of marriage, which is the two becoming one, sharing a single life. So much so that we describe it theologically as one flesh. There's a single flesh union between the two. So this is all in the background, or you might say Plato's in the background of all of that kind of theological understanding of the common good arising from the communion, the union of the many, right? The communion, the coming together into a one that you find in the theological discourse of Christian marriage. Okay, so I'll just read a little bit more of this dialogue to show you this is where the conversation is pushing. Okay, so a little bit later. This is 421. Let's go with B. Okay, 421b. Now, if we are making genuine guardians, the sort least likely to do the city evil, and if our critic is making pseudo-farmers, feasters happy at festival, so to speak, not in a city, he is not talking about a city, but about something else, right? So if you're thinking to make a farmer happy is to make him happy in some way other than being a farmer, say through luxury or through doing something other than farming, that he's not technically a farmer because his happiness doesn't turn on being a farmer, and therefore we're not actually talking about a city here, because then he wouldn't, in his sort of inmost being, he wouldn't be he wouldn't be playing that part of a role in that community, and so he actually wouldn't be a part of the community, and therefore there wouldn't be a community, and so not a city. Okay, continue. What we have to consider then is whether our aim in establishing the guardians is the greatest possible happiness for them, or whether, since our aim is to see this happiness develop for the whole city, we should compel and persuade the auxiliaries and guardians to ensure that they, and all the others as well, are the best possible craftsmen at their own work. And then, with the whole city developing and being governed well, leave it to nature to provide each group with its share of happiness. Okay, so the point of this passage, the idea in this passage, is when the parts perform their function, when each group in a community, in a city, in this example of politics, when all the different craftsmen perform their craft well, and they focus on that craft, and they don't try to find their fulfillment outside of that craft, then what happens is they excel at that, and all of those varied crafts will intermingle, and as Socrates puts it, it'll be a natural consequence that the parts are fulfilled by their fulfillment in the whole, right? So by the whole being healthy or good, each of the parts shares in that glory, or shares in that health. So it's once again, I keep using the example of an organism because I think the city is an organic whole in a very real sense. So think of an organism. When the whole organism is healthy, all the parts need to be doing their function well, right? If one part ceases to function, then they're not going to be able to aid each other, or at the very least, the way that they aid each other is going to be deficient. and then it's going to start to break apart. It could even turn out that the organs start fighting against each other, right? And this is something like an autoimmune disorder where it starts to decay itself internally. It's not like there's some external threat. The threat is internal to itself. It's a unweaving of its unity, and it sees itself as its own enemy. And what Socrates is saying is the happiness of the parts comes about when they all literally see themselves as a single organism, and then they reap the benefits of that single organism. So they each become healthy only because the whole is healthy. And then they serve each other, right? They serve each other for the very reason that they share a common life. It's not like, oh, I need to do this because my life is more important than that person down the street's life. No, it's because we share a common life, we don't fight. It's once again referring back to the idea of a single common body of Christ, or a single communion of saints. That there really is a single life that's shared, and that is the very fact that grounds the ability to love in a way that's not self-serving, because you, in a very real sense, you come to see not my life against this other person's life, who's going to get the apple, who's going to get the good, but rather when you see that there is a single life, there's no competition, there's no war, there's no fighting. And so he thinks it's just a natural consequence of unity that the parts are made happy, or the parts are made fulfilled. And what then prevents this, or can prevent this, or destroy this, corrupt it, as it's stated on the very next page, what can corrupt this type of unity, or the city, which is to say, what corrupts the happiness of the whole, is, interestingly, wealth and poverty. These are two ways for the city to be corrupted: if it's too wealthy, or if it's too poor. Likewise, if the individual parts of the state, or the individual groups, if any one of them is too wealthy or too poor, that will also corrupt the whole. Think of it. We'll go returning to our favorite analogy. If the if the liver has an excess of something, I don't know exactly how livers work, but if there's an excess of something, a certain amount of I don't know, whatever the liver does, cleans the blood, I think, something like that. If it has an excess, it's going to destroy it in a way. But if there's a deficiency, it'll also destroy it in a different way. So you can think of wealth and poverty as these metaphorical examples of excess and deficiency. Happiness is thwarted, happiness is corrupted when there is an excess or deficiency. Right? Too many donuts isn't going to make you happy. And it might turn out that too few donuts, well, maybe not donuts, but I don't know how you want to call it, too little nourishment, or too little food is going to also make you unhappy. So the example of wealth and poverty is the way that Plato introduces this notion of excess and deficiency, and happiness is going to be something like the mean between extreme wealth and extreme poverty. And you need to have some resource, but not too much, because if you have too much, then that's going to actually distract and get in the way of your work, right? Returning to our discussion about luxury and the notion of need, you won't be doing your work well if you don't need to. And if you don't do your work well, then that's going to have effects down the road, right? So as he puts it, Socrates puts it, 422a, wealth and poverty, for the former makes for luxury, idleness, and revolution, and the latter for illiberality, bad work, and revolution as well. So revolution, this is interesting, revolution, or revolting against the authority, revolting against the whole, revolting against the order, the established order, is the effect of these two contraries. It's the same effect that can be brought about by these two opposite states, these extremely opposite states. Wealth and poverty both can give rise to the revolt against the order. That is, the revolt against you doing what your function in this organic whole, the city, is. Right? And so maybe consider it in another context. One more example. If you're a student and you are excessively bright, things are really easy for you to pick up. That can make you lazy in a way, right? You become lazy, and so then you fail to do your work, and you might even fail the class, not because you're stupid, but because there's a type of excess. Like you cease to work because of an excess of something. You cease to do what students are supposed to do because of an excess of something. Now, on the other hand, another student can cease to work not because that they have an excess, but there's a deficiency. Maybe they just find it difficult to pay attention, and they find it difficult to comprehend what they read, and so they just stop. They just don't do it because they don't have enough wherewithal or attention to stay the course. Likewise, that's going to prevent them from doing the work of a student. They're going to not be able to do what students are supposed to do. And so in both cases, the excess and the deficiency can bring about the same result, namely a cessation of work. At the very least, they're going to not be able to do that work well. Okay, so that's kind of in the mix here. Okay, and so what you have is this introduction of justice as what unifies the many into a one, and what we're appraising when we're trying to determine what would be a good government to live under, what would be good laws to abide by or to establish, what would be a good way to interact with other members in society. All of those questions need to turn on the goal of politics, which is that type of unity of life, that type of shared goal. That shared life is what the law, it is what activity in the commons is for. And so to construct laws, or to come up with laws that isn't predicated on that basic fact, are automatically going to be unjust laws, because they're not going to be aiming towards or pushing the individual members of society towards unity with each other, but rather it's going to be such that those laws are about preserving separation, preserving distinction, preserving a type of individualism, which is just contrary to what the function or the nature of justice is, right? This is I don't think I can reiterate this enough. Justice is the virtue of unifying the many into a one. And the happiness of the many comes about through, or it's derivative of, the happiness of the whole. So the parts cannot be happy unless the whole is happy. It's a very significant political thesis that is ultimately rooted in a metaphysics, that is the relationship of the many to the one, and thereby what makes the many what they are is going to be in relation to the one. This is imaged in the polis, or put it another way, the polis is an image of that metaphysical reality. And so to have a different view of justice, which is perhaps, an individualistic, atomistic type of democracy or tyranny or something like that, is ultimately going to be an espousing of a different metaphysics. So you can't hold a metaphysics where the many find their fulfillment as many within the one. Basically, the metaphysics that seems to be at the root of what we've referred to as the body of Christ, the many members, the many parts, but the one head, the one life. That metaphysics seems to be decidedly anti-individualistic. But moreover, it's also not a what Plato is proposing is not like a communism where you get just a straight collapsing of the many into the one, so that the many cease to be many. It's almost like renounce your individuality, renounce your function, your individual function or role, because all there is there's just the one state. So that would be something like a communism where you have a collapsing of the many into a one. But I think that likewise is not what Plato's up to. What he's up to is something like a paradoxical indwelling of the many within the one, and the one not just exemplified but incarnated, the one manifested, instantiated within the many being just, right? So the metaphysics is revealed through politics, and the politics is also revelatory of the ethics. So you could think of politics and ethics as revelations of or exemplifications of this deep metaphysics, which is ultimately theological in nature for hopefully by now pretty obvious reasons. There's significant Trinitarian underpinnings to a lot of this this metaphysics of the one and the many. And the way to think of justice is about preserving that tension between the one being one and overarching, and the many being many and distinct, right? You don't get rid of distinction, but you also don't ignore the oneness which all the many depend on. Okay, so this is very significant, and what effects this has for politics is that in a just society, interestingly, what you have is legislation becomes almost mute or redundant, or it doesn't need to be stated because of the fact that it is just what nature is. The nature of the many related to the one is just what any legislative decrees would decree, right? So any type of legislation would be a decree of how the many should interact so that they form a one. But in a just society, that's already the case. And so this is why Plato, right around 425b, he says there's something like a naivete to think that we need verbal or written decrees. Here's how he puts it. Socrates says, "To legislate about such things is naive in my view, since verbal or written decrees will never make them come about or last." That is, in an unjust society, no telling people the many need to interact in a way such that they form a single whole. No written or spoken decree is going to make that happen. Rather, what could only make that happen is if they received a different education, if they thought differently, if they understood themselves differently as many and as related to each other. That would then give rise to justice, but no external pronouncement which would be posterior to this individualized, presumed metaphysics. No pronouncement would be able to overpower that and then force the many into a one. And that's why Plato thinks musical training is the most important thing for the guardian. This is on the preceding page, 424c. What's most central is that one, as he says, one can never change the ways training people in music, and one can never change the ways of training people in music without affecting the greatest political laws. So a change in musical education, which we've discussed last time as sort of educating of the soul, in the proper sense that we said in the last episode, that has the greatest effect on political law or politics, more than any change in external decree could ever have, right? So to think that, if we're going to be doing politics, we need to figure out the best laws to make. That's important in a certain sense, but what's even more important, what's even more political, is how to raise citizens well, how to raise children well, how to educate people is a political question. And if you've done that correctly, then there's almost no need for legislation because the legislation has become internalized. This is the whole origin of the notion of a natural law, that the law becomes one's nature. One sort of incarnates the law through this formation that they've received. And so, as Socrates puts it at 427b, Adeimantus asks, what remains for us to legislate then, right? So if the just city basically does everything that they already ought to do, and so there seems to be nothing left for a legislative decree to, order, because the order's already there, what's left to legislate about? And then Socrates, interestingly, says, for us, nothing, right? There is nothing left for us to legislate about. But for the Delphic Apollo, there remain the greatest, finest, and first of all legislations. And here what you have, I think, is this reference to law is not something that the human is ultimately in control of. What the human is in control of is ordering themselves to the true. That is, by sort of uniting themselves to what is true. What is the proper order of things? What's the proper way to live, either individually or communally as a society? And the law is then not really up to us in our hands. Rather, the law is something which is he seems to be alluding to, almost divine. It's something that has been handed to us or given to us through this type of education, which we saw last time is something like a grace, right? No one gets to say when they're a child how they're going to be educated. So to receive a good education is something like a divine gift. And so the question of the role of legislation in politics, I think, according to Plato, should be, a lot smaller. That's not that significant of a question about which laws we should have. The more pressing question is what type of education should we have? And no one can be happy unless they're just, and therefore the necessity of education for happiness is of the greatest importance. And then the second half of the book is actually stuff that I've already alluded to at great length, second half of book 4, and that's he makes the transition from the justice of the city to say, hey, look, what we've done is we have shown the role of justice in the city. We can now turn to see that the justice found there is something that can also be found in the soul, so that it's not like there's two different forms of justice. There's only one form of justice, but it can be exemplified or realized or instantiated in many different ways. Just as you can have the same book instantiated, realized, published in many different ways. You can have an electronic version, you can have an audio version, you can have a written version on paperback or a written version on hardcover, different size fonts and all that. They're all different ways of modes of presenting the exact same form, the exact same content. And so what Socrates is doing at the end of book 4 is he's saying that discussion about politics, what we can now see is we can now see that is one of many different exemplifications of the content or the form of justice, which can then be situated within the context of the individual man, the individual human, and we can now think of our lives, think of ourselves as little communities. Our life is a type of community of various emotions and passions and desires, reasons. You think it would be good to do this. You also think it would be good to do that. You feel like that would be, scary to do. You feel like this would be painful to do. And you have all these people, so to speak, these voices in you contributing, saying, do this, don't do this. No, you should do this. And then someone saying, no, that's stupid. Don't do that. You have all these voices in you competing, trying to take control of your life. And what the just man does, or is the one who can take all those voices and unify them, so that if one of those voices, so to speak, this is all just a metaphor, it's not literally these voices in you, but this is just to carry on the metaphor, if one of those voices in you shouldn't have as strong a say as another one, then the just individual is the one who has tempered that voice. That voice isn't as strong in them, right? Going back to the issue of excess and deficiency. There's not an excess of that voice, and so it doesn't have as strong of a pull when it's not a good voice to listen to in this context, right? Hunger is not a good voice to listen to when you're trying to make all your medical questions, or trying to answer all your medical questions. In some situations, you have to fast for many days if you're going to have certain, procedures, operations, which would be healthy for you, would be good for you. But if hunger was your strongest desire, you wouldn't be able to temper it. Like, it would be very difficult to fast for 2 days, even though your life kind of depends on this. It would be very, very hard for you to give up eating within this context. And this happens with a lot of other things. You don't have to think about surgery, but even just think about food. Some people have various problems with either eating too much or too little food. Some people have problems with drinking too much alcohol, and all these different passions are like these different voices that are too loud in you. They speak too loudly. And so what justice is, the formation of justice, or what education is it's about trying to make yourself just, about trying to make those voices speak softer so that they don't control you as much. And so the way to think of ethics is like you're a little tiny community of all these different voices, these different roles that want to speak their opinion on what you should do with your life. And they all have to come to a single agreement. And you don't want one of them being the tyrant and completely mastering or ruling the others, because then your life will become a slave to that voice. And the point of education, and we'll be getting to this in a book not too far down the road. The point of education is to free you. It's to make you free, to free you not externally but internally, so that you don't have any voices in you, so to speak, continuing the metaphor, that are your masters, that are the things that are overpowering all the other possible things that need to be taken into consideration. And so education is about freedom, because it is ultimately about justice, which is ordering all the parts so that you can live in harmony, which is ultimately what it would be to live freely.